Okay, everyone. Since I cannot be here today, I am going to walk you through the introduction to Napoleon. So pretty much the video will help introduce this gentleman to you. And to start off, there were 3 slides of notes assigned to introduce how exactly Napoleon comes to power. So this is the beginning of chapter 20, the age of Napoleon, 1799-1815. Those are the years that he reigned in France. So let's begin talking about how exactly he comes to power. Okay, first off is during the French Revolution in the 1790s, Napoleon was a soldier for the French and eventually becomes a leader of the French army. And he is sent out to many parts of Europe to help the revolution continue against countries like Austria and Prussia and Britain. So he was sent to the Netherlands to fight the Austrians and to fight the British. He was sent to northern Italy to help secure those parts for the French Republic. He was sent into Spain as well. Now, eventually what happens is during the later part of the 1700s, in the late 1790s, there are some economic troubles still persisting within the French Republic. And the Directory who was in charge, they decided that they needed to put down this revolt, because what was happening was the son and grandson of Louis the 16th, they were still alive, and the grandson was the one who was being thought to become the new king of France. So the thought of returning the monarchy to France was one of these issues, and it led to the return of certain emigres from the outskirts of France coming back into the central part in hopes of overthrowing the Directory and reestablishing a monarchy, an absolute monarchy. So eventually Napoleon, he is asked by the Directory to help suppress this rebellion that is taking place in France. So Napoleon, with the help of the military, will suppress the Bourbon resurgence, and eventually the Republic is restored under the leadership of the Directory. Now, some background on Napoleon is he was born in Corsica, which was a French territory, but pretty much he was able to enter into the junior officer program, and throughout the French Revolution, he is a supporter of the Jacobin group. So throughout the French Revolution, he is the one who is being sent all throughout Europe, helping to secure the power of the French Republic. And even though at a certain point during the Reign of Terror, the Jacobin group will be executed during the Thermidorian reaction, Napoleon is not captured and he's not executed, primarily because they recognize his value in leading the military against the Second Coalition and the ongoing coalitions that will continue to fight France. So Napoleon will be saved, and he will be utilized by the Thermidorian reaction to continue to fight against the other countries of Europe and to suppress the internal revolts that are occurring. Okay, so here's a summary of some of the areas that Napoleon is going to be entering and conquering. He has a lot of success during his early military career. He's nicknamed the Little Corporal, even though he wasn't that short in comparison to what we may think he was, but he, compared to some of the men who surrounded him, he was not quite as tall, so that's where he gets this idea, or this, the perception that he was a short person. Pretty much what happens and how Napoleon comes back into this, during the late 1700s, pretty much right around 1797, 1798, after having much success in Europe, he's sent off to northern Africa, to Egypt, to battle the British and the Ottoman Empire. Because really up to this point, Napoleon hasn't suffered any defeat at all. And the British are the main target of the French because the British are such a major naval force that if the French can take the British Navy out, that will lead to better French economy because they can control the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. So anyway, cut it short. Napoleon goes to Egypt with the French forces. There is the thorn in Napoleon's side. His name is Horatio Nelson. And Russia, Austria, Britain, and the Ottomans will together defeat the French in Egypt. Now, while the battle is going on, Napoleon recognizes that the end may be near. He actually abandons his troops and he flees back to France. Now, he comes back to France quite as a hero because no one knows what exactly took place in Egypt. So when he comes back in a period where there is turmoil happening within Paris and France. And at this point, he's given the opportunity to increase his power by helping out the Directory, and that's where he will begin his gaining of power within the country of France. Okay, that's sort of the introduction here. Now, the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to watch a video. It's called Horrible History. It's one that kind of makes a little bit of fun at Napoleon, but for the most part, it gives you some good background information. It's about 4 minutes long, so let's go ahead and watch this.
To the news at when, during the reign of George III, when Britain, and indeed most of Europe, finds itself under threat from Napoleon Bonaparte, a brilliant if slightly power-crazed French emperor. Here with more details on this fascinating man is Bob Hale with the Napoleon Report. Bob.
Thank you, Sam. Well, history is a set of lies that people have agreed upon. Who said that? Well, I did just then, but I was only quoting this chap. Yes, it's Napoleon Bonaparte, France's most famous general, who history has admittedly told a few porcupines about. For one thing, he wasn't that short. In fact, he was 1.7 meters tall, the same height as Tom Cruise, and he's not short, is he? So, talking of short, not that he was short, this is the short history of Napoleon Bonaparte, starting right here in Corsica, where in 1769 he makes his first important strategic move, being born. Then he makes another one, moving over here to France and training as an army officer. And as a soldier, he is revolutionary. A French revolutionary, in fact, as he helps to overthrow the monarchy and protect the new people's government, an act which wins him fame, wealth, influence, and helicopters, though possibly not the last one. In fact, by 1796, our little soldier boy, not that he's little, is placed in control of the entire French army, and that's the end of that. But not for long! With an entire army under his belt, though not literally, Napoleon sets about showing what he can do with it, invading Italy and Austria and attacking British trade routes over here in Egypt. A tactically brilliant plan which surprisingly falls short, not that he's short, leaving him without so much as a boat to sail home. Yeah, you can say R if you want, but it's up to you. But when he finally gets home to France, he has a nice surprise waiting for him. And no, it's not a helicopter. With the government bankrupt, if you can imagine such a thing, the people want someone else to run the country. And guess who gets the job? Napoleon! Yes, after a brief spell as governor, he declares himself Emperor of France, King of Italy, and Sultan of Swing, though not the last one. And how does he celebrate? Why, by having another war! And whilst he's utterly thrashed by Nelson's navy at the Battle of Trafalgar, he makes a cracking comeback, beating both Russia and Austria. And as a well-done present to himself, builds a huge Arch of Triumph. Can't remember what it's called. But he doesn't stop there. Oh no, he starts bringing even more countries into this new French empire, which make lovely presents for the family. He gives Spain to his brother Joseph, makes his big brother Louis King of Holland, while his other brother Jerome gets his own piece of Prussia. Well, it makes a change from songs. In fact, there's just no stopping those Bonaparte boys, right up until the point when someone stops those Bonaparte boys. Yes, it turns out that the countries of Europe don't much like being conquered, so they start a war against Napoleon, and this time he really gets caught short. Not that he's short. He loses the war, gets captured, and knowing that the game's up, tries to poison himself to death. But his plan hits a hiccup when the poison gives him hiccups, and he just vomits it all back up. So the Allies kick him off the throne, exile him to the tiny island of Elba, and presumably clean up the vomit. And that is the end of that. But not for long, and I mean really, not for long. Within just 100 days, Napoleon escapes from the island, gets back to France, raises an army, And yep, you've guessed it, starts another war. He strikes back against Europe, facing the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo, a battle which perhaps unsurprisingly proves to be his Waterloo. Yes, he gets his little pants thrashed off, not that he's little, and is made to live out the rest of his life on St. Helena, an island even smaller than Elba. Well, how small is it? Well, I'll tell you. If that's Elba, then that's St. Helena, then that the scale is a football pitch, that's a London bus, that's Napoleon, that's Tom Cruise, that's a sheep, that's a dog, that's a cat, that's a mouse, that's a spider, that's a baby spider, that's an atom, and that's how much energy I've got left after explaining all of that to you. Oh, honestly, I just... Oh, yeah. Why on earth do I do these standing up? Oh, back to you, Sam.
In 1805, the French army under Napoleon were the dominant land power. But when it came to naval power, the British Navy under Admiral Lord Nelson simply ruled the waves. Anchors away, boys.
Okay, now what you're going to do is there are two handouts. The first handout is a reading called the Napoleonic Era, and the second handout is pretty much what you're going to be writing on here. Now, as Napoleon comes to power in 1799, this is going to explain how exactly he sees his power. He comes in as a general of the French military. He's fleeing Egypt, and he comes back, and within a year, he will have complete control of the French government, which he will have until 1815. So, the substitute will pass out the reading, and will pass out the other handout. It is broken into 6 parts. So what you need to do is read the handout, or read the reading called the Napoleonic Era, and then outline under each category what Napoleon changes as he becomes the new consul of France and eventually the emperor of France. So part 1 is to describe the rise of Napoleon and the creation of the consulate, and 2 through 6 you will figure them out as you go through here. But these are all internal reforms that Napoleon undertakes first, because eventually he will become a warring emperor. But first things first, he decides we need to take care of the French internal problems like the economy and conflict with religion. So go ahead and read and outline the handout, and at this point you can stop the video. Okay, now, once you're done with the outlining of the domestic reforms, there is a second video that we're going to watch. This helps review some of the reforms that Napoleon does during his period of time. It's about 5 minutes long, so let's go ahead and watch this.
Coup d'etat of 1799, a new form of the Republic was proclaimed, with a constitution that established a bicameral legislative assembly elected indirectly to reduce the role of elections. Executive power in the new government was vested in the hands of 3 consuls. As the first consul, Napoleon controlled the entire executive authority of government, had a great influence over the legislature, appointed members of the bureaucracy, controlled the army, and conducted foreign affairs. In 1802, Napoleon was made consul for life, and in 1804 he returned France to monarchy when he crowned himself as Emperor Napoleon I. This step was not only the start of his enormous ego, but also the start of his dictatorship. In 1801, Napoleon made peace with the Catholic Church. He was not devoted to any religion. He was a rationalist who regarded religion at most as a convenience. By signing the Concordat, the Pope acknowledged the accomplishments of the Revolution. Although Catholicism was not reestablished as a state religion, Napoleon was willing to recognize Catholicism as the religion of a majority of the French people. As a result of the Concordat, the Catholic Church was no longer an enemy of the French government. Before the Revolution began, France did not have a single set of laws. Instead, it had 300 different legal systems. It was necessary to prepare a codification of laws for the entire nation. Napoleon was put in charge of bringing the work to completion in 7 codes of law, of which the most important was the Civil Code, or Code Napoleon. These codes recognized the principle of equality of all citizens before the law, the right of individuals to choose their professions, religious toleration, and the abolition of serfdom and feudalism. Napoleon worked on creating a powerful and centralized bureaucracy of capable officials. Promotion was to be based not on rank or birth, but only on demonstrated abilities. Napoleon also created a new aristocracy based on merit in the state service. He created over 3,000 nobles between 1808 and 1814. Nearly 60% were military officers, and the rest came from upper ranks of the civil service. Napoleon's domestic policies both destroyed and preserved aspects of the revolution. Napoleon shut down 60 of France's 73 newspapers and insisted that all the manuscripts be subjected to government scrutiny before they were published. One prominent writer, Madame de Staël, refused to accept Napoleon's growing despotism. De Staël wrote novels and political works that denounced Napoleon's rule as tyrannical. As a result, Napoleon banned her books in France and exiled her to the German states. When Napoleon became consul in 1799, France was at war with Great Britain, Russia, and Austria. Yet Napoleon aspired to have peace instead of war. The peace he sought was achieved at Amiens in 1802 and left France with new frontiers and a number of client territories from the North Sea to the Adriatic. But peace did not last because both the British and the French regarded it as temporary and had little intention of sticking to the terms. In 1803, once again there was a war against Britain, which was soon joined by Austria, Russia, and Prussia in the Third Coalition. In a series of battles from 1805 to 1807, Napoleon's Grand Army defeated the continental members of the coalition, which gave Napoleon the opportunity to create a new European order. Napoleon considered himself leader of the whole. Within his empire, Napoleon demanded obedience. His growing egotism required obedience to his will. Although Napoleon was a dictator who forced obedience of his people, he accepted legal equality, religious toleration, and economic freedom. Napoleon tried to destroy the old order of estates. Nobility and clergy everywhere in his states lost their special privileges. He wanted everybody to be equal before the law and equal opportunities for everybody. Napoleon had hoped that his grand empire would last for centuries, but it collapsed almost as rapidly as it had been formed. Two major reasons that led to the downfall.
Okay. Now, there is a handout. If the substitute could pass it out to you, please. It is titled The Rise of Napoleon to Power. We're going to review and go over parts A and B right now, which describes the rise of Napoleon to the position that he will gain. Okay, so as Napoleon returned from Egypt, he found that the Directory, they were in turmoil from within. The directors themselves were divided on how exactly to deal with the plaguing issues of France and the economy and the religious issues that existed as well. Because remember, during the Revolution, all the church land was seized, and that did not sit well with many of the people of France, that the church really became a branch of the government. So Napoleon comes back, and one of the directors, Abbé Sieyès, asked Napoleon to support the overthrow of the Directory, which of course Napoleon wants to, he will participate in. So now what happens is, because Napoleon had the army behind him to support him, what will happen is the Directory of 5 will end up becoming a Directory of 3. Now they are known as the 3 consuls, which is Napoleon, Abbé Sieyès, and Ducos. Now eventually what happens is each one of them, they are titled first consul, second consul, third consul. Napoleon is known as the first consul. So he is the one who holds the majority of the power. The people look at Napoleon as a hero for his military victories, and eventually he will end up seizing complete control of the government and getting rid of the other 2 consuls. Now, what Napoleon will establish is known as the first consul or the consulate, and at this point, in 1802, he pretty much is going to hold a plebiscite. Okay, it's there in bold. He asked the people of France to vote for whether or not he should be considered the ruler of France, and it was a very simple yes or no vote, and because of his popularity among the people, he will win the plebiscite, and at that point he declares himself the first consul. And also, just to note, it also helped that his brother was the one counting the vote. So, but the majority, most people would say Napoleon, he would have won. He was hugely popular among the people. So that shows you the introduction here to how Napoleon actually seizes power. From his military might, he helps push aside some of the directors, and then eventually he becomes the first consul, and that is how he gains power. Okay, now we're going to move along here to the textbook. So in the textbook, we're going to go to page 732. Now, on the board, the textbook page is up there, 732. There is a directive on what exactly to do. Now, you're going to go into the book, and you're going to find the section that is called Suppressing Foreign Enemies and Domestic Opposition. And what you're going to do is that you're going to read this section, and you're going to outline the steps that Napoleon took to secure allegiance from people and also to dispose of opposition. So France, you have a very unique mixture. You have emigres that are trying to come back to reestablish the monarchy. You have Thermidorians who help get rid of the Jacobins, but you still have some Jacobins there as well. So overall, it's going to describe what did Napoleon do to actually get people to support him, and for people who did not support him, how did he deal with them. Okay, so you can go ahead and stop the video right now and read the section of the book and outline the directions that I gave to you. Okay, now what you should see as we move forward here with talking about Napoleon and what exactly is going on. Napoleon, he is very much a leader of the people, the third estate, which is the bourgeoisie, proletariat, middle class. They love Napoleon, and a lot of it comes down to what he wants to do with the country of France. First of all, abolishing hereditary privilege, destroy the feudal system. So pretty much those two things alone are things that have kept the third estate down, has kept the peasants in line because they've always been subject to the dues and the taxes given to them by the nobility. So the peasants are also given the opportunity to keep any land they gained during their revolution. So church land that was sold to the peasants, they were allowed to keep. All right, so overall, Napoleon is a very popular individual among the masses of people. Not all that popular among the clergy right now, but that'll change coming up here. Now, some of the domestic reforms and policies that occur under Napoleon, and these go back to the handout from the Napoleon era. He will create a meritocracy. So in other words, the old system of nobility is no longer going to be important in France. It's now based on what can you do for the government. And if you can provide military service or you can provide government service through the bureaucracy, that will increase your standing within the social and political society of France. Religious unity with the Catholic Church, which was called the Concordat of 1801. Pretty much in this case, Napoleon will recognize will recognize Catholicism as the religion of the majority of French people. It does not become the official religion, but what he does is he begins to allow the Pope to once again appoint the bishops of the French Catholic Church, while the bishops do, however, may continue to be paid by the French government. So it's kind of a partnership between the French government and the Catholic Church, which during the revolution of the Jacobins, the Catholic Church was made secondary. It was an arm of the government, but the Pope had no connection to the church under the Jacobin dictatorship. So he will make peace with the Catholic Church. Creates the Bank of France to help increase loans in order so people can start businesses to help increase the economy. Economic reform to stimulate the economy, provide food at low prices, increase employment. He did a lot of public works, building bridges, canals, railroads as well, because the Industrial Revolution is in full swing right now, and the state will take control of public education as well. And that's primarily to help devote people's loyalty to the state and not to the church, which it used to be to the church, and now they want it to be to the state. Now, the big one, this is actually one of the basis of French law today, is called the Napoleonic Code. It's a uniform code of law which gives all people equality before the law. It protected private property, it abolished serfdom, and another thing which seems maybe not all that important to us today because we don't really deal with this. Back prior to this, only your eldest male would inherit land and property. So the younger children were often out of luck. They had to find some other means of income, some other profession. That'll change as well, and property will be distributed among all children, including males and female. And now the last one, women, they do not really do all that well during the time of Napoleon. They're just not really considered to be all that important contributors to Napoleon's reign, so they still are struggling during this period of time. Okay, now, moving on to one of these other areas that Napoleon is going to deal with, it is loyalty. And what you're going to do, if you look at the notes handout, we should be under number 7. It is called the Imperial Catechism of 1806. Now, what you're going to do is that you're going to get the reading, which is in a folder, and you're going to read the catechism. Now, if you do not know what a catechism is, it's pretty much a religious type term to help people help people learn the principles of something. And it could be for religion. In this case, it is very much religion with politics mixed in. So go ahead, read the primary source, and then you should be able to answer letters A and B on your handout. Okay, and really you'll get a glimpse into how Napoleon is trying to teach loyalty to the French people, because you have to always keep in mind the Bourbon dynasty is not dead, although Louis XVI is dead. His grandson is not. Okay, so Napoleon has to ensure his reign by getting people to support him, and this is one of the documents you'll see. This is what he uses to do that. So you can go ahead and stop the video right now. Okay, now to finish this today, to finish the first 2 lessons on Napoleon, hopefully what you understand about the Imperial Catechism is that this is something used by leaders all throughout history. Hitler did this as well. Stalin did this as well. Not to compare Napoleon to them, but in a lot of ways Napoleon is seen as a forerunner to modern dictatorships and indoctrinating the youth. He pretty much uses this catechism as a way to make people understand that Napoleon is next to God in his rule, so their allegiance should be to him because God has put him in that position. And it's something that we don't really see too much today. We have our small things that we do, like the Pledge of Allegiance, but that's nothing in comparison to what the children of France would have had to know in order to show that they are loyal and they support their Emperor Napoleon. Now, pretty much the overall theme here of the first 2 periods is that, first 2 lessons, is that while Napoleon comes to power, when he comes to power, France is at war with at least 4 countries of Europe. And within 3 years, he's going to make peace with all of his enemies. And the main thing that we'll see is he doesn't do that because he actually wants peace with them. He recognizes the need to improve France internally first and then prepare to go after countries externally. And his main target will definitely be the British here, and we'll end up doing that on Friday. Now, so what we see is, how does he begin to build support? There were people throughout the revolution that were imprisoned. They fled the country. He will begin to offer general amnesty to all these men of all political factions if they were willing to pledge loyalty to him. Now, for those that did not, he had secret police that would find them and force them into it, or if not, they would be imprisoned. He controlled the press. I think France had roughly, a dozen or so newspapers prior to Napoleon, and he ends up reducing it down greatly because he believed the government should read all newspapers before they're released. They regulated education. Now, one of the Bourbon family members who was on the outskirts of France trying to rally support for the return of the Bourbon monarchy, he will eventually be executed as well. So while Napoleon, he welcomed people back, he also knew that he had to ensure his reign continued. Okay, now the last thing is eventually Napoleon kind of gets bored of being the first consul and he wants to become Emperor of France, and he will do that. He makes another constitution in which he declares himself Emperor of France. He also does another plebiscite vote by the people, and the people overwhelmingly support Napoleon becoming the Emperor of France, and he will crown himself Emperor Napoleon I. Now here's a painting of the coronation of This is actually the coronation of his wife, but one of the famous stories that surrounds this was Napoleon. He invited the Pope to the coronation ceremony, and the Pope had the crown about ready to place it on the head of Napoleon, and at the last minute, Napoleon rips the crown out of the Pope's hands, and places it on his own head. And pretty much what all historians say is he did that to show that while yes, we are now at peace with the Catholic Church, we are by no means subservient to the Catholic Church, and France is strong, independent, and eventually you see here he is placing the crown on his wife's head as well. Okay, so that is it for the first 2 lessons on Napoleon's introduction and some of the domestic reforms, and the next thing we'll do on Friday will be War of Napoleon. Thank you.